Okay. Hello. Welcome to your first chapter. We're going to be talking about how your camera works. How your camera works. How your lens works. How your camera works. How your sensor works. How it all works together to create an image. This is important. It really is. You don't think so? It is. This is the foundation to any great photographer. Any successful photographer in the world will be able to tell you how this beast works. Pay attention. This is your first chapter inside your camera. Okay, these days we have two systems that we're going to be working with mainly. I hope the second one's still around. I hope DSLRs are still around by the time I finish this course. But these are the two main systems. There's a few others, there's medium formats, but we're not going to go into that just yet. These are the most common at the moment. DSLRs or digital single lens reflex have been owning the market. But mirrorless cameras over here, which don't have a mirror inside them, obviously as well it wouldn't be called a mirrorless camera. These are slowly taking over the market. It's smaller, there's a lot of performance being packed into them. We're going to go into how each one works, how the lens works, and lastly, how the sensor works. Okay, so firstly, we're going to look at DSLRs. Stands for Digital Single Lens Reflex. Take this off first. Finally. This is where the light gets processed. This brings the light to your DSLR. Light travels through your lens, through various elements, which we're going to get into a little bit later, and then gets into your DSLR camera body. Bounces off a mirror, you can actually see the mirror if you just look straight into your camera. Bounces off that mirror, goes up into the prism, bounces around the prism, and then through your viewfinder, so you can see what's in front of the lens. The nice thing about this is reflection requires no energy from the camera's part, doesn't consume battery. The bad thing about it, it's quite cumbersome. Well, these days, since we can see what mirrorless bodies do, they're quite cumbersome, they're big, they're heavy. Well, not that heavy. Anyway, you depress the shutter speed, that mirror lifts up, exposing the sensor to light. The sensor can then take a light read. The problem about that is when the mirror lifts up, it blocks your vision. Obviously, this is a prism relying on reflection. When the mirror lifts up, it can't see what's in front. You can't see what's in front of the lens, so it goes black. If your shutter speed is a thousandth of a second, doesn't really matter. You probably won't even notice it. If your shutter speed is 5 seconds, it'll be black for 5 seconds before you can see what's in front of the lens again. That is a small disadvantage with DSLR bodies. So DSLR body, a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, consumes a little bit less power. Now, mirrorless camera, like we have here, most of the mechanical and technical side of these cameras are quite similar in the way they process light. Okay, the big difference with the two is one is mirrorless, quite obviously. If you look into this one, you might think you're looking at the same thing as a DSLR, but that's actually the sensor. Same thing happens, light comes through the lens, through all the elements that we'll get into later, and goes directly onto the sensor. When you depress the shutter, it's only making the sensor responsive to light for that amount of time that you've decided in your shutter speed and your settings. We'll get into that later. Okay, so if your shutter speed is 10 seconds, it'll make the sensor responsive for 10 seconds. It'll absorb light for 10 seconds. So in the case of a mirrorless camera, you actually, when you look through the viewfinder, you're getting a digital representation of what's in front of you. That has a few advantages and a few disadvantages. The main advantage is you can get real-time adjustments. In other words, when you put your settings into your camera, you actually see what's in front of you changing according to exposure. If you're making your image darker on purpose, when you're looking through your viewfinder, the image will actually be getting darker. So you can actually see your adjustments at work. With a DSLR, you can only see what your picture looks like in terms of exposure once you take the picture. The disadvantage is the digital representation coming through straight through onto your LCD or your viewfinder chews up battery. But still, very nifty camera. And like I said, I hope by the time I finish this course, talking about DSLR is even relevant because these are taking over the market. So we've spoken about mirrorless bodies, DSLR bodies, digital single lens reflex. I have to keep saying the whole thing. Now we're going to talk about lenses. More sophisticated than you think. You can get a zoom lens or you can get a fixed lens. A zoom lens obviously has a wide range of magnification. This one is 70-200mm, and a fixed lens will be fixed at 20mm, 24mm, 200mm, 400mm, whatever the fixed focal length might be. Which means that the makeup of the lens is slightly different, but they work relatively in the same way for the same function. Okay, if you look inside a lens like this, it'll have 3 sets of elements. This is metal tube, holds all those elements in the right place as well as various functions. There's 3 sets of them all performing different functions. Right in the front of the lens, you'll have gathering elements. What they do is they take light, they bend that light in the right direction and funnel it through the lens. So it's not just bouncing all over the place. Those are called gathering elements. So after gathering elements, you've got 2 other sets of elements. So you've got your zoom elements and you've got your focus elements. These can be reversed in various lenses. One can come first and the other last, depending on what kind of lens. Your zoom elements, when you rotate your zoom ring, if it's a zoom lens, it has various magnification options over here. then those elements will move back and forth, magnifying, zooming back. And your focus elements work quite similar. They move back and forth. They're mobile on your lens. Every time you roll your ring, they'll move closer or further away to each other and focus closer or further away from you. Most of the time these days, a lot of people shoot on autofocus. That's how your lens works. This brings in the light and helps you focus, and this turns the light into a picture. Let me put this back in here. Okay, so that is how these bodies work. That's how the lens works. That's how the lens deals with light. That's how the body deals with light. There's one more thing we're missing, and that is the sensor itself. The sensor, you've got to look at it, it's actually a two-part piece of equipment. On top of it is what's called a Bayer filter, and then the sensor itself. Remember, a sensor only reads in brightness, dark or light. It doesn't read in color. Bayer filter, named after a very smart man. So smart, in fact, that he realized that having more green filters than red and blue, double the amount, will give a sharper image than having an equal amount of red, green, and blue. Red, green, and blue, all colors are made out of red, green, and blue, hence the color filter having red, green, and blue filters. So that allows the sensor to read color, the two working together. Underneath it, the sensor silicone slab is filled with what's called photosites or pixels, and they get charged with photons, which is light energy. There's two types of sensors in the world. There's CCD, or what's called couple charged device. Big names. There's a bigger one. CMOS, which is called complementary metal oxide subconductor. Even CCD is older technology. It has its advantages, and we're not going to go into it too much because most cameras these days are actually CMOS sensors. Most CCD sensors exist in medium format cameras. They're very expensive. Advantages are because it's got less electronic movement around the sensor. Electronic wavelengths like that create noise inside your sensor, which create noise inside your image. It is much better in low light conditions. The problem is it's a very slow readout, so it doesn't have a fast frame rate, and it's very expensive. Don't really worry about the CCD camera if you're at this stage, the CCD sensor. If you're at this stage, your photography game, you're probably going to buy a camera with a CMOS sensor. CMOS sensor, complementary, whatever it was, CMOS sensor. A much cheaper sensor. It's in most of these bodies, these DSLRs, this mirrorless, they all use CMOS sensors. It's got a much faster readout because it's taking out every single row of pixels, photosites, and taking a light reading of all of them all at once, instead of the CCD, which takes it row by row. The problem is with all the electronic waves going past your sensor, it generates noise, so it's not as good in low light conditions, and it's much less expensive. So all of these have CMOS sensors in it. So the way the sensor works is through a process called transduction. Transduction, when you take one energy form and convert it into another energy form. Big word, I know, I googled it. So in this case, photons hit the sensor, they charge those pixels, they charge those photosites. That then gets converted into a voltage through transduction, voltage value. That voltage value then gets converted into code. Code can be read by the camera's computer and then rendered into an image. So that is how your camera works. Lens, body, sensor, all those three things together allow you to take beautiful pictures. You might not think it's important. It is important. Every professional photographer knows how their camera works. You should too. Hope that made sense. We'll see you for the next chapter soon. Cheers.